Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Midwest Innocence Project Fireside Chat. I am Leigh Carroll. I am a paralegal at MIP, and I have with me my colleague Blair Johnson, who is our staff investigator. And I wanted to welcome everyone. And if you could tell us that you're here in the comments, just say hi. Or if you have any questions or comments that you would like us to address or answer, you can put those there, and we'll try our best to get to those. But first of all, we're going to just kind of get right into this, and I'm going to ask Blair to tell us how she got into being an investigator at MIP and how she found MIP, what she was doing before, and kind of her background.
Yeah, so I actually remember when and where I was when I first heard about MIP. I was living in a small town called Dodgeville, Wisconsin. At the time, I was working at a company up there for several years, and I had just quit that job. I was done with it. I got burnt out. It was a very stressful corporate job, and I had decided that that wasn't what I wanted to do with my life anymore. And I had allowed myself a week from the day I quit to the day I had to move back. I was moving back to Kansas City. This is where I'm from. I grew up here. And so I was in the middle of like packing and do all these things to get the house ready to move. And I had taken an interest in kind of innocence work and wrongful convictions. And I remember wondering if there was an innocence organization in the Kansas City area. And I remember Googling it. And I was surprised to find that the Midwest Innocence Project was located in Kansas City. And I remember I remember two things I saw on the website. I remember reading about that year's FOI, the Faces of Innocence Gala. And I remember about reading Rodney Lincoln. He was the first client that I read about, and it really grabbed my attention. And then when I moved back to Kansas City, I reached out and got involved that way.
Okay, so what was your career before you came to MIP then?
I was a project manager at a software company. I got a degree in mathematics, and it was a very kind of technical / process-oriented job, and it was fun and it was good, but it was not what I wanted to do forever. And so I decided to leave that and completely switch directions and really take a moment to figure out what I wanted to do next. And then that was kind of the beginning of finding this work.
So how did you come to MIP? You didn't just jump right in as a staff investigator. What was your journey once you found MIP?
I started off as a volunteer. I remember I reached out and I spoke with someone on the staff at the time, and I remember applying, and I remember writing I want to get involved in the work, and I don't know where my skill set is best fit, but I want to find that out. And when I came in, I remember the first thing I did was organize this massive paper record, and that I was hooked after that. I remember, and some of the people who were on staff at the time probably remember, I took up the whole conference table, and I was laying out police reports and transcripts and all these things to try and get a paper file in an organized way so that we could actually make sense of it and make it usable.
Okay, so you volunteered for a while, and then you kind of got hooked into what MIP does, and then what happened?
Yeah, it was a very gradual process where I kind of found my way as opportunities became available. I worked with a staff member, Summer, on a hair grant project a lot. I worked on a lot of cases out of Iowa. We were looking at that. And things just kind of came up gradually. I shadowed some attorneys on some investigation. I took an investigations course. I did a number of things, and it was just a very gradual process into where I started working on casework.
And so I know that you contracted for a while. You were a contractor, and then tell us how you got into, now you're our staff investigator, full-time employee. So you had a job that you were working, and then how was that transition when you moved to totally working for MIP?
Yeah, it was all just very gradual, and it just blossomed into this wonderful thing. I did start out as a contractor, which was a case by case basis. Trisha had a case for me to work on. I would work on it as needed, as the case needed. And I did a couple cases that way. I had originally gotten my first PI licenses in Iowa because there was a need at the time for that grant project I mentioned, for some casework up there. So I did some Iowa work, and I think the need just became great enough to where MIP could support a full staff position, and I was thrilled at that opportunity.
So what was MIP doing prior to you coming on staff and contracting and everything for their investigative work? Were they contracting it out prior to that then?
Yeah, I think it was just on a case-by-case basis, and I was doing some of that. And we also work with students a lot, so that's a big part of investigations as well, and we still do.
Okay, great. So you talked about that you have your PI license. Can you tell us a little bit about that process, and do you have that license in multiple states, or how does that work?
Yeah, I have a license in Iowa and Missouri, and it's different by state. You just have to look into the regulations for the state. It's like a licensing agency like anything else, and Missouri's was a little bit harder in that you had to like study and take a test, and Iowa didn't have that. But there's different insurance requirements for each state, and different, it's kind of, you have to go through a number of processes, and if they're different, you have to get both types of insurance and things like that. So it was just a matter of checking off all those boxes, and it took a little while. Yeah.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know this, we work in 5 states. We work in Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, and Arkansas. So our cases come from any of those 5 states, and each of those states have different rules and regulations and statutes. And so we're constantly trying to figure all of that out, and we have to be able to switch from one to another pretty quickly when we're doing our work. And Blair does a great job of that. So,
the equation a lot for that because of filings in different states are so different.
So how do you think that your investigative work fits in with Midwest Innocence Project's process of our casework that we do?
Sure. So I know on the last Fireside chat, Rachel talked a bit about the post-conviction process as a whole. Where investigation comes in is somewhere in the middle. You've probably heard a bit about how cases progress from application through the wait list, and because there's such a high demand, that does take some time. Once a case is reviewed and it's determined to meet our criteria, and the legal team feels like there is potential to prove innocence, then it goes on the investigation wait list until resources are available to further investigate that case. And so there's a number of cases in that stage. And then when those resources become available, cases get moved up to investigation. And investigation is the pre-litigation phase. It's where we're trying to determine if we can prove that there is innocence. It's directed by the legal team. We have legal meetings, case meetings, to determine how to move forward with an investigation. And every case is very different because the facts are different and the evidence is different and what we have to prove is different. And so it's a collaborative process to figure out what that investigation plan should look like. And then my role is to carry that out in a number of ways, whether it be through talking to witnesses, trying to locate evidence, things like that. And really it's working up to litigation, and it even extends through litigation a little bit because facts are always arising. You never know when new facts might surface, and that might be when things have already been filed. So it leads up to litigation, and it supports litigation.
Okay, great. I just want to remind everybody out there, please send us your questions and comments, and we'll try to incorporate those as we go along or at the end, whichever works best. So back to some of the things that you do as an investigator, Blair. How do you prepare when you've got an investigation plan? You know what you're going to do. You're talking to the attorneys and the legal staff, and they've approved your plan. So what are your next steps? Like, how do you prepare to really dig into that investigation plan?
Yeah, I would say the very first thing to do in preparing for the investigation phase of a case really is to know the case front to back. Like, the more you know it, the better positioned you are for an investigation. And so I try to do that as much as possible. It's impossible to know everything at all times, but the more you know, really, the better you are. Especially if I'm doing a investigation that does involve going out and talking to witnesses. It's really important to me to know who all the people in relation to the case are, how they relate to one another. And that's something that I like to prepare for thoroughly. As far as investigation planning, it's important to loop in the legal team, to be thoughtful about what you're doing and when, because everything can affect each other. So you want to be thoughtful about the order in which you approach things. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. So just to kind of loop back a little bit, you say that you need to really dig in and know all the facts of the case. And so I know that from working with you and doing some of this myself, that we are constantly looking for the records in the case. And to preface this, a lot of our cases are really old. They're from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and that can really cause a problem in trying to get records. Can you tell us a little bit about how we get records, where we find them, what sources we use, and what some of the problems have been with us getting records?
Right. So with a lot of our cases, as people may know, one of the routes you can possibly take in a case is to pursue DNA testing. That's one option in a case. And with the age of some of our cases, you've kind of got this thing where it's like, well, DNA testing might be great because if given the age of the case, they probably did not DNA test it before. Most likely we can do better testing methods, better science now than when the case originally happened. But on the other side of that, because it's so old, sometimes that evidence is very hard to locate. Sometimes it cannot be located, which is the really sad part of it. And so part of my job is to help try and locate that evidence. And it starts with, at the very beginning, you are trying to understand what the evidence in the case even is. Sometimes it's going through a lot of records to even find out what that universe of evidence is, because you've got police department records, you've got lab records. Is this white shirt the same thing as that white shirt? You have to figure all that out so you really know what you're looking at. And then once you have that scope defined, it's reaching out to those different places that it might be. And it can be a whole number of places. It can be at the original investigative agencies. It can be at the labs. It can be at courthouses. Sometimes there's multiple courthouses to check because there's a change of venue. Things get shipped back and forth. And so there's a lot of places to check, and you start sending letters or calling these places, and then eventually you do go there. So I'll go to courthouses. I'll look through the exhibits at a trial, see what's there, and do a number of searches at different places to try and locate the evidence, document what's there, what's not there, the condition it's in, et cetera, so that the legal team can make a decision on whether further testing would be advantageous to that case and help prove innocence.
Yeah, so one of the things that a lot of our cases may include several different investigative agencies. They might have a local police, they might have a county level sheriff's department, they might have the FBI or a state bureau of investigation. So there's a lot of different places that we have to go to get records and to look for evidence. On some of our cases, it's been really hard to find transcripts from old court hearings. And a lot of times we'll have to go back to the original court reporter and have them generate those. So there's a lot of nuances in trying to find all these records. Yeah. Right, Blair. And also, you know, I know Blair has gone to places outside government agencies to get records as well, like from family members or interested parties, advocates for our applicants. In someone's basement, they might have records. So it's kind of it's a challenge to get everything that we need. And then as far as evidence is concerned, like I know when we've tried to get evidence, some of the agencies, it's all dependent on what their protocol is. And some agencies save everything from a case and they'll be like, yeah, it's over here in this cabinet, and there's a whole cabinet full of evidence. And others, we have to look at every single government building in the county and try to run down this evidence. So Blair is really good at that. And And what are some of the things that you do when you do find evidence? Like, how do you document that and determine, I guess, what that evidence is and what use it might be in our cases?
Yeah, I think when I go out and try and locate evidence, if I find a box at the courthouse, for example, I will index it. I will write down everything that's in there, any labels or things that might be on it, because sometimes one item might have a number of different item designations because the lab has one, the police agency has one, the court has one. Document all that, photograph it sometimes, and really you want to get all the information you can of what's there so that you can take that back to the legal team to make a decision on what, if anything, we can do with that evidence. Sometimes, once we do find something, we will send like a preservation letter, just like really indicating, like, keep track of this, like, with the court. But after that, it's really in the hands of the attorneys that I work with to decide, do we want to pursue testing for an item and then pursue that in the courts or whatever mechanism. It varies by case and by jurisdiction, of course.
Right. Yeah. It varies by state on what we have to kind of prove before we can do any sort of testing. Let's see. So we talked about the age of our cases. How else does that affect your work? As far as trying to locate evidence, records, witnesses, that type of thing.
Yeah, as the case ages, everything ages with it. So, I mean, in a 30, 40-year-old case, if you're going to talk to witnesses from that case or people who might know information about that case, it's something that is from 30 to 40 years ago. So that's a challenge for a number of reasons, depending on that person's relation to the case. Maybe it's just something they haven't thought about in a long time, and having to bring that topic up, it has its challenges. Finding the evidence, like we talked about, is difficult in older cases. Yeah, so there's a number of things.
Okay. So we have a couple of questions, and one is, what is one of your biggest challenges that you find that you're facing consistently in your work?
Well, there's all sorts of challenges. I'm trying to think of like an overarching theme. I mean, what comes to mind now is just that we're all staying at home. Like, that's all that's coming to my mind. And so that's obviously a challenge, because a lot of my typical day-to-day work includes going out, as I've said, talking to people or going to courthouses, and a lot of courts have been closed. And a lot of, witnesses, even if I was willing to go out to them, they might not be willing to talk to me, right? It's not safe. So it's been a change, and that's a challenge, because we've had to think about different ways to move our work forward, because the work still needs to be moved forward. So I think our team has been creative in trying to keep things moving. Yeah.
Does that change how you contact witnesses then? You said you can't just like meet them in person. It makes it a little bit harder. Have you been doing any telephone interviews or?
I've been doing some telephone interviews. I prefer to meet with people in person, but sometimes you have to do things different ways. And so, yeah, I've been calling people. We've been doing a lot of, I've spent some time doing some more, sometimes you can move cases forward in the investigative process by really reviewing the records for sorts of things, really understanding the records, answering complex questions by looking at the records. And so that takes time too. So there was a time during the stay-at-home time that I spent 2 weeks diving deep into a case to try and basically analyze the records. And that's important too. So.
Right. What are some of the sources of information that you use when you're trying to get information about a case that's maybe extraneous from government provided information?
So there's all sorts of sources of information. Like, one thing kind of leads to the other. I know that Leanne and I are very familiar with newspapers.com, for example. It's a great website for looking at newspapers, and it's amazing. Some areas are better at having newspapers than others, but it can be tremendously helpful and figuring out who's who, what places were there when, like if you're looking for a particular gas station from 30 years ago, those records, sometimes the easiest way to identify what that was is to look at newspaper articles from 30 years ago. So that's one source. Libraries are great for old directories, old phone books, things like that. The internet is a useful tool. A lot of stuff on there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, look, some local newspapers are so great sources of information because they report on everything. And we found a lot of really good stuff. Or even like Blair said, if you're looking for a business that was there back in 1980, you might be able to find an old ad. We've tried to find like what business hours were for certain businesses, and we've been able to locate that in old newspapers. So that's kind of a fun exercise that we get to do in our job. So we have a couple of other questions. One is, do you ever get into tense or exhilarating situations when trying to collect evidence? And I don't think we really collect evidence.
Right.
We are pretty much just trying to locate it. So is that?
I don't feel like when locating evidence, it's a pretty, mostly that involves me sitting in a room looking through a box. It's not too tense. It's more just like I'm focused and trying to take my time to go through things. I think when going out and talking to people, that can have a variety of feelings that come along with it. I think I'm pretty level-headed about it most of the time. I don't get too nervous. Sometimes you do, and you just push ahead with it. One thing that helps me, both when going in to look at evidence or when talking to people, is to take a moment before you go in to do the thing you're about to do and really get into the present moment about it. And I'm not like a master present moment thinker or a master meditator or anything. I wish, but basically take that moment to let go of the 2 hours you just drove to get there, let go of where you need to drive tonight, let go of thinking about the whole case or this conversation you just had, so that you can really go in and focus on what you're about to do, whether that be talk to someone so you can really listen to them and hear what they're saying, or whether that be looking through a box of evidence so that you're really looking at it and not missing it because you're in your mind thinking about something else. So I really try and kind of reset anytime I'm about to do something important, and that can help with nerves too if you have them.
Yeah. And I want to say, we don't just roll up to the sheriff's department and ask to see their evidence. It's all very prescribed, and we do it legally. We, go through the prosecuting attorney's office, or we go through the courts to get to that evidence, and everything's very controlled. So it's not like a surprise thing where we just show up and look for evidence. Another question is, how often do you have to renew your PI licenses?
Both of the ones I have are every 2 years. And of course they're not lined up. So I feel like I always have, insurance expiring or license, there's continuing education to get. So it's cyclical, about every 2 years. I don't know if other states might be different than that.
Okay. And then we have another question that says, how do you and Blair's jobs work together?
Well, we sit by each other and we talk every day. A lot. We have a lot of overlap in our jobs, because so much of being a part of a legal team is not just the investigator role, the paralegal role. There's this, we're trying to build this collective knowledge about a case. We're all trying to understand the case the best we can. And so there's overlap. Sometimes, on a given case, Leigh might know the facts the best, because she did some really thorough digesting and some really thorough things. And in other cases, that might be me. And it's this very collaborative effort where, we're always talking about the facts of the case and sharing tasks, whether it be online research, newspaper searches, reviewing the transcripts, going through medical records. There's a number of things, and we all work together on it. So we chat about the casework we do all the time. Leigh, if you have anything to add to that.
I was just going to say at MIP, we're a really collaborative team. We're a small team, although we're growing all the time. And we really do work as a team. And so we rely on each other a lot. We talk through everything together. It's not unusual for us to sit and just hash out a case more than once, usually over the course of the case. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else on my list. Oh, you talked about travel. So when you are able to travel, what's your travel like?
It's very flexible. I book a car, but I don't book my hotel rooms and much in advance, maybe the first night, because I don't know how long I'm going to stay in one place, if I'm going to switch to a different location, because sometimes it's kind of a cluster of different towns. They might be an hour from each other because people move around after 30 years and they might be in the same general region, but they're not in the same town altogether, right? Or if I have to go to multiple courthouses in different counties, and things might take longer or less long than expected. So you have to be pretty flexible about it. And so I always just pack up my bag and put it in a car and then get ready for the next day. I'm very comfortable traveling. I like it. It's, of course if you're on the road for a long time, it gets tiring, but I enjoy it and get to see a lot of different places and meet a lot of different people. I like it.
Yeah. And I will say, having traveled with Blair a couple of times, she knows the best places to stop and get snacks and drinks along any highway between here and St. Louis or here in Muscatine, Iowa. I think we even looked at that on a map one time at all the places that Blair frequents along the line. So
yeah, if anyone has Android phones with Google Maps, it dots all the places you've been in the last few years, and it's pretty cool to look at.
Yeah. Blair definitely has her favorites that she stops at.
Yeah.
So, does anyone else have questions? Otherwise, I think that's pretty much all we have for today. I'll leave it open a couple minutes, I guess, to see if anybody has questions. Blair, do you have anything else that you would like to add?
No.
All right. Well,
thanks for listening in.
Yeah, thank everybody for tuning in. And I would like to encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter. And if Tish can put up our Twitter handle, there we go. And also on Instagram. And visit our website. Is that up there? Yeah. Make sure you put the THE in front. And also you can find us on Facebook and YouTube. And if anyone has any suggestions on further Fireside Chat topics, let us know. Just leave us a comment or tweet us or put something on our Insta, and that'll be great. So thanks, everyone. I appreciate everybody's participation today. And thank you especially to Blair for answering all of our questions. And we'll see you next time.